You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Irish Squad Show. My name's Joe George, host of Locked On Sports Chicago. Normally we just go live there for these postcast shows, but today we're across the Locked On Irish YouTube channel and Smothered and Covered as well. And we're joined by Alex Dono of Locked On Canes, Kenton Gibbs of Locked On Wolfpack, both hosts of Locked On ACC, and Barrett Sallee, who is in the press box right now at the Notre Dame, Indiana, a host of Smothered and Covered here on the Locked On Sports Network. What's up, guys? How y'all doing?
Warmer than I thought I'd be because they do have the heat on up here, which is very welcome because outside not so much.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So Notre Dame wins this game, guys, pretty easily. I mean, I know the score is going to look a little bit better in the end, 27-17. For a second there, we had to double check before we went on the air if we were in danger of a backdoor cover for Indiana. But look, Notre Dame really, from the get-go, I thought, just controlled the game on the ground. Defensively, they were great. So, Barrett, we'll start with you, just being, at the game, the first college football playoff game at home for Indiana in this expanded format. What was kind of your take on the day and everything you saw there in person?
Well, the day itself, I mean, it couldn't have been better. A great setting for the first on-campus playoff game. The snow on the ground this morning got a little choppy, got a little muddy towards the end because all the folks started walking on it. But I mean, it's the perfect setting. And for me, we're sitting up here and, the first, 5 minutes were chaotic. And then Notre Dame goes on that 16-play drive that seemed like it took about 5 hours. And at that point, they were basically in drain the clock mode. I mean, it felt like at that point the game was in hand. There was no concern on Marcus Freeman's face, and he coached that game like it was a directional Indiana school and not one that dang near made the Big Ten championship game.
Alex, what did you think of the game tonight?
I thought that the game never felt close. I guess you could say from the Curtis Rourke interception, but then the 98-yard touchdown run by Jeremiyah Love that followed that, 7-0. It really felt like 21-0 at that point for the Fighting Irish. And it's funny because both of those teams are from the state of Indiana, so you'd figure they'd both be acclimated to playing in this kind of weather. But the Indiana Hoosiers looked cold out there, especially with their inability to punt. I mean, that was, if you're going to try to play the field position game, those 25, 35 yard punts didn't do them any favors. So the Fighting Irish were able to completely control that. I thought Notre Dame settled into the game nicely because, we did see an early interception from the Irish and it seemed a little bit frantic, but then really after that Love touchdown run, Notre Dame was able to fully get in control. Riley Leonard really came on, and I know it's not easy to throw in that sort of weather, so he looked a little bit stiff at times. His receivers made some great catches, and I like what Barrett said about going into control the clock mode, but you do what you have to do to win. It didn't lend much to the excitement of the football game. And then I guess Indiana and Curt Cignetti didn't get the memo that Notre Dame was eating all that clock when they're still punting in the fourth quarter when you're down 3 scores. So
many sad kicks.
Yeah, so many.
I mean, the punter was also just terrible.
Yeah, it was awful.
He was awful the first. And look, I hate beating up on college kids, but man, he was just struggling early on. I mean, Ken, when you see Jeremiyah Love go for 98 yards like that, I imagine you felt like all of us and just like this game's might get out of hand pretty quick here.
I actually believed in Indiana. I actually thought, hey, Indiana can make this thing close. They can make this thing a situation where we have an actual football game on our hands. Too bad Curt Cignetti and company were not aware that this is a single elimination tournament. Curtis, I'm going to call you Curtis because your mama named you Curtis. This is not round robin. You don't get to go and play everybody else in the tournament and just say, you know what? We can be conservative today.
It's not round robin like a kid's travel ball tournament.
No, this ain't the Little League World Series. It ain't double elimination. You're not going to play the Chinese Taipei in the next game, brother. You're done.
It's best Chinese
Taipei.
I'm just saying, to watch them go into this game, and you talk about how terrible the punter was. You're down 3 scores with 10 minutes left, and you say, let's go ahead and bring out the guy that's been terrible all game. What?
And you know what's hilarious, Kenton, is that with 3 minutes to go, they get aggressive. They recover the onside kick. They try another onside kick. It's like, dude, where was this the first 3 quarters? Like, you might have actually been able to win the game had you not had a sad field goal and 2 sad punts. Like, come on, man.
And here's the craziest thing of why I say, although the score did indicate that this game was out of reach the entire time, it feels like the eye test is a little bit working against what we actually saw here, because part of me was like, damn, they couldn't tackle Jeremiyah Love all day. But if you take away that 98-yarder, the guy had, 8 touches for about 30-some-odd yards? That's what I mean. You had a chance. And they just were like, you know what? We're content with the L. We're going to play the loser of the next game to move forward. That's not how it works in the playoff yet.
No, I mean, I can't even believe how the day started with him going on game day like that and saying we don't just beat top 25 teams. Sorry for cussing for people. All these past performances that just don't even matter. But I don't know, this game, this is kind of from my perspective, doing all these Notre Dame postcast shows. This is kind of what it's been like most of the season, where they played Navy, they played Army, they played teams that were top 25 ranked, but they just controlled the clock, controlled the ball, and really haven't been challenged for the first time still since the NIU game, which is really bizarre. I mean, Louisville gave them a little bit of run, but just another team that just can't handle it. And I'm curious, Bear, was there any indication that Jeremiyah Love was hurt, though, to what Kent was saying? Because he didn't touch the field for the next 2 possessions after that 98-yard run.
You know, we were talking about that up here, and we didn't see him going to the tent. We didn't see him on a bike. We didn't see him at all. And maybe it's just at that point, Marcus Freeman was like, "Yeah, we'll save you for the Sugar Bowl. Let's not get you too much run." But no, I mean, there was no indication. I honestly, I'm excited and interested to see if Marcus Freeman is asked about that. It's not on yet up here, but I would be fascinated to hear his answer. But to your point, don't go on game day and talk smack if you're not going to back it up. That's just it does more harm than good to your entire program.
Yeah, I know what he's trying to do, but it just was not. It got the fans were pumped that were there at game day very clearly, but then to have that performance, it was really tough. But we saw Janarian Price, he had a good day running the ball. I mean, really all 3 running backs were pretty solid for Notre Dame, and I think that's one of the biggest strengths of why they'll be able to compete with Georgia's, because even though Jeremiyah Love, if he's dinged up still, it's just not one guy.
Yeah. At what point do we admit Notre Dame is good? No. At what point do we do it?
I can do it. I'm more than willing to do it. And it's funny because that NIU loss is one of the more embarrassing things that can happen to a program like that. It's hard to top that, to lose to NIU, but at the same time, they have been so good since that point. And we're going to be having conversations, and you're going to see what the national media is going to be doing after this game. The narrative is going to be, well, see, the SEC should have gotten more teams in. Indiana didn't belong there. But, okay, we can have 2 separate conversations, and I'm sure we'll have the other one tonight. But 2 things can be true at once, fellas. Notre Dame, they're both lines of scrimmages absolutely dominant, as they have been for most of the season. That was really the key to just manhandling Indiana tonight. And so, maybe Indiana, a little bit fraudulent, very fraudulent, but Notre Dame, that's a good football team.
So here's my question. Because I don't believe Indiana was fraudulent. Let's say, for kicks and giggles, let's say, just hypothetically, which I think that Joe can go with me on this hypothetical. He's a Notre Dame guy. Hypothetically, Notre Dame goes out there and beats Georgia by 14 points or so. Is Georgia frauds, or did all of a sudden all of these teams that Notre Dame beat by these margins, do they become legitimate? One of the 2 has to happen, or else we're objectively admitting, well, the idea of SEC teams is so good that we refuse to even acknowledge a possibility of, well, maybe we undervalued these teams or overvalued this one. And by the way, Dono knows this. I know this because we're both ACC guys. I think it's very interesting that missing quarterbacks is no longer a criteria that'll keep you out the play. I think it's interesting. I'm just saying.
Well, you know what? You made a great point about Georgia. Here's the thing, though. In this particular season, it's not about how high your ceiling is. It's about how low your floor is, right? The
Right.
only team that really hasn't shown many warts is Oregon. And I would say really from the Northern Illinois loss, the other one might be Notre Dame. And I've said for a long time, they're the best boring team in college football. Right.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. That's a really good thing in this year because, you don't want Carson Beck throwing 3 interceptions. You don't want, Quinn Ewers going out there and looking like he's injured. That's if you're consistently boring but good, then you're going to go a long way. And I tell you what, like right now, that Georgia team with Gunnar Stockton. Well, first of all, being around that Georgia team, Gunnar Stockton's kind of a legend, and he might be a better option in that game against Notre Dame because Carson Beck wouldn't have absolutely no success against a guy like Xavier Watts, and he played his absolute tail off today.
Yeah, he's honestly I hate to put lofty comps on guys too, but he has plays this season where it's like Kyle Hamilton light, where he's in the middle of the field and all of a sudden he's run 30 yards across the field. It feels like is getting interceptions. Xavier Watts is probably honestly my favorite player to watch. Outside Jeremiyah Love on Notre Dame. Kind of to your point though with the defense and how it's looked this season. Do you guys feel like Indiana still was having some success though on the ground? It did feel like Notre Dame was a little. I don't know if it was. They were just having some success against the Irish moving the ball before their offense was stalling out. I don't know if that's something big picture to think of, but it just felt like Indiana was moving a little bit at times.
I didn't really feel that way. I mean, at the end of the day, I maybe there were a couple of drives where Indiana showed some promise, but they were held to 63 rushing yards on the day.
Mhm.
I want to see I don't have the total team yardage in front of me. I can pull that up in a second. 278 total yards, 63 rushing yards. I don't know, man. I didn't see too many warts on the Notre Dame defense, if I'm being fully honest.
Can I tell you what this was? This was some empty calories here. This
Yeah.
was a lot of empty calories at the end of this game. Because if we look at when this game mattered, when this game was quote unquote in the balance, Kurt Signetti and company said, you know what? We're resigned to the fact that they'll give us nothing and we'll take nothing. We're okay with nothing burgers right now. It wasn't until Notre Dame went into those very soft zones. It wasn't until Notre Dame's nearest defender to the line of scrimmage in terms of anybody that wasn't a pass rusher was about 8 yards back to where, Indiana finally started to make something happen. Which, I mean, that's kind of part and parcel of the gig. You're saying, we'll keep everything in front of us. We'll tackle them in bounds. They'll run out the clock, which is what happened. So I don't think that I look at Indiana's offense and say, they've shown me something that I can use in the next game to say, here's the weakness. I didn't see it.
Bear, did you see anything there from the Indiana offense against Notre Dame's defense today that just stood out anywhere? Or was just absolutely dominating from your view, too?
I mean, Justice Ellison looked okay in the second quarter, but coming out of halftime, man, what'd they have? They had negative 15 rushing yards in the third quarter. I felt like when they did get some momentum on the ground, that Notre Dame defense just absolutely locked them down. And then to Marcus Freeman's credit, he looked at that team and looked at what they did well against that Notre Dame defense and just shut it down in the second half. They had a lot more pressure up the middle. They tackled on the edges. You saw a lot more from Notre Dame's corners jumping in and helping out against the run. So I think really whatever success they did have, which was marginal in the first half, the adjustments that were made at halftime were that was championship level.
Yeah, I think Marcus Freeman, he kind of proved his contract tonight. I think that was the only thing when he got it this week was we all got a little nervous feeling. At least I did. It was just well, I have seen Marcus Freeman lose to Marshall and Stanford and NIU. Please don't lose to Indiana after getting a 4-year contract extension. Donna, what'd you think of Riley Leonard tonight? I'm sure you've seen him a lot. Obviously when he was at Duke, but then at Notre Dame now. I thought he was solid tonight. He doesn't have to do a lot for this team.
No, he doesn't, and I think that suits him well because he's a tremendous manager, but he's a weapon when you get in the red zone. We all know He's got that Notre Dame quarterback rushing touchdown record. I mean, once you get down around that 5-yard line, Riley Leonard's going to pull out some magic. And he's a great conductor of that orchestra. And you can see, like, he's not somebody who's out there to try to compile his stats, because nobody looked happier when Jeremiyah Love ran for 98 yards than the guy who had just handed it off to him, who had thrown an interception in his prior snap. Like, nobody looked happier than Riley Leonard. So I think, honestly, he's a perfect fit there, like, for a big physical team like Notre Dame that's going to win battles up front. To have a quarterback who manages the game so well and can run the way that he's capable of doing. I mean, and it's one of those things, and Kenton, I'm sure, can say the same thing. When he was at Duke, and there were rumblings about him hitting the portal, everyone was saying that's Notre Dame all the way, and he hit it with the no contact tag, and you knew exactly where he was going. So yeah, I thought he had a very Riley Leonard-esque game. He made the mistake early on, and he responded from that. And on the flip side, I know that, Curtis Rourke's stat line ends up looking more flattering than he really played, because a lot of that
talk about empty calories.
It's all about the empty calories late in the game, because I thought when Rourke threw his early interception, he didn't really recover from that, at least not until, garbage time fourth quarter, where Riley Leonard, after throwing his INT, he sharpened up for the rest of the game.
Yeah, and to speak to what you were saying there in terms of the how Riley Leonard was a perfect fit for this team, I tell people all the time, Riley Leonard was a Ferrari among Fiats at Duke, and that's with all due respect to the players at Duke that were with him. But that's not to say that they were bad players. It was to say that the system was greatly reliant on him being Superman. Dono can attest this. I can attest this. I watched him play. I watched them win games because he was Superman. At Notre Dame, it's the exact opposite. It's, hey, play within yourself. Don't make the critical mistake. And hell, even if you make a bad mistake, we can recover from it. Just don't make another one. Just accept, hey, that play didn't go your way. You don't have to be a guy that's going to make a bunch of Superman throws in super tight windows. Just make the pass that you're supposed to make, do a little something with your legs, be a net positive, and we'll be okay, which he's done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bear, I'm curious your thoughts on Riley Leonard too, because obviously, covering the, from a national view, like, we're not seeing great quarterback play this year. I don't really know who is Dylan Gabriel, and then I don't really know who, like, the next guy is, what you were saying earlier about Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers and these quarterbacks. Obviously, like, Riley Leonard has some limitations, but he's still just not asked to do a lot. Like, do you think if this were to be a shootout game, like, he still has that in his bag too? Or where do you kind of view him as a quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if he does get into a shootout, there could be some questions. I think at times in this game specifically, he had happy feet, especially early on. That interception was one of many that could have happened in that first half. He just looked rattled. And then even in the second half, pressure up the middle, he had to bail out, but he was bailing out even when there wasn't pressure up the middle. So, I think that there is some concern there. But the thing is, in my mind, there aren't many teams that can get Notre Dame into a shootout. So I think maybe being able to coach around him is something that Marcus Freeman can do. But, he's limited, and that's okay. He's limited. But, I think in this game, if George is going to look at this, or whoever down the road, if they can beat Georgia, we'll look at it and say, okay, pressure up the middle. That's how you get to Riley Leonard. And if he bails and he beats you, fine. But that's the way you got to go about attacking him.
All right, we're going to take our first time out here. When we get back, does this game tonight say more about Notre Dame, Indiana, or maybe more about just the expanded college football playoff? We'll get into that next year on the Locked On Irish Squad Show here all across the Locked On Sports Podcast Network. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved up to $500 total million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, what does this game say to you guys? We'll start here with Kenton. What does this game say to you about Notre Dame, Indiana, the college football playoff expansion? What is this more about?
Well, first thing first, the college football playoff on average, I believe the semifinal games, the average margin of victory was about 18 points. So congratulations. This was a relatively competitive game in comparison to that. Take that for what you will. Now, what does this say more to me about, or who does this say more to me about? I'm going to go with E, an option you didn't present. Super conferences. That's what it tells me about. You look at these super conferences that were created, and everybody says, Texas hasn't played anybody outside of Georgia. Indiana hasn't played anybody outside of Ohio State. Well, what the hell did you think would happen when you said, I know what we'll do. We'll take these conferences that are about 12 to 14 teams, and we'll make them 18. And we're going to ensure somehow that everybody plays really good teams. That's not how it happens. As sure as the sun rises on the east and sets on the west, you will see anomalous seasons like this, to where, no disrespect to Indiana, I think that they're a good team. However, they received a bump because, again, the conference is so big, they got to play teams that they otherwise would not have had to play. If the Pac-12 still existed, where would Washington have been this year when Indiana played them? Somewhere playing Oregon State or something like that. And they would have had to play Penn State. They would have had to play one of those teams that is a little bit more serious than Washington was this year, with all of the exits in the poster board type of situation. So it says to me that super conferences will create these teams that are built up and propped up to look a certain way, but they just are not that. I think Notre Dame is a really good team, but to me, this game didn't convince me of that. Their entire body of work convinced me of that. But this game convinced me, you know what? Maybe the super conferences were a mistake.
Dono, what you think?
You know, I think to me, and I co-sign on pretty much everything Kenton just said. I'm not going to steal his points, though. I'm going to go on my own direction. I do think it says a lot about the format, that when you expand to 12 teams, and if we move to 14 and 16 in the future, you can't expect every matchup to be a barn burner and to be a close competitive game. Now, I want to be very careful with the way that I lay this down, because I'm not going to be one of those people that said, hey, this shows Indiana shouldn't have been in. Of course they should have been in. They earned it. Like, are we really, and I know this is going to be happening on every ESPN show that we all love with two guys screaming at each other. They're all going to be saying, well, this is what happens because they left out Alabama and they left out Ole Miss or they left out South Carolina. Like, I can't be that guy who tells you that any 3-loss team deserved to be in more than a 1-loss Indiana, whose only loss came to an excellent Ohio State team that's, you know, one of the favorites to potentially win this tournament. Indiana deserved to be there. It's the reality of the format. The wins, the resume, the record has to mean something. At the same time, I think this says a lot about the format, that if you're going to expand it to 12 teams now, 14, 16 in the future, you can't expect every matchup this early on in the CFP to be great. Hopefully we get more competitive, close type games later on, but you can't expect everyone to be a barn burner. And yeah, did Indiana get exposed tonight? Probably. I'm also not going to take anything away from Notre Dame, because again, they went out there, they earned it, they dominated, they played a near flawless performance, and they played their brand of football. I respect the fact that when they're up double digits in the game, they essentially spent 20 minutes of game time, if not more, running out the clock. But that's what you do when you're ahead and you're dominating the opponent. So I think this says more about the format than anything else.
Yeah, and I apologize, Guy, because they cranked up the volume in here, so it's really loud. But I think to both of y'all's point, that's 100% accurate. You got to put 12 teams in a 12-team playoff. You just have to, and there are folks who are retroactively going to say, "Oh, well, Alabama should be in, Ole Miss should be in." None of them should have been in. None of them should have been in. You can't sit here. I think moving forward, this is the first time we're doing this, right? So, you learn your lessons. After the first one, you heard the TCU Baylor discussion, and then Ohio State got in and they tweaked their decision making a little bit. I think now what you're going to see is a more focused, more focus on strength of schedule, right? Because like to your point, Kenton, about super conferences, you're going to have teams that just breeze through just for no reason whatsoever, because certain teams just have down years. That's what happened to Texas. It's what happened to Indiana. So if that's going to be the case in an era of super conferences, you have to recognize when those teams have that luxury. And Indiana had it. I'd say Texas has it for sure. But moving forward, I think the committee will put more of an emphasis on it. Every landscape is different. I get that. But there's no way that you should have, in retrospect, maybe it shouldn't have been SMU that was being debated. Maybe it was Indiana, but you live, you learn. We'd never done this before. And I think moving forward, they will take the lesson from this year, specifically this game, and incorporate it into their meetings moving forward.
But yes, I think that's an extremely slippery slope. I'm sorry to cut you off there, Joe, but I think that's an extremely slippery slope, because what are we doing here if we say, hey, you can have an extremely strong schedule, and because of that schedule, you can lose 4 games and we'll let you in. You play a good team. So what if they beat your brains in? You got a great strength of schedule, therefore we let you in. And here's my biggest thing that I absolutely hate. This idea that, this team would beat this team. Because one thing I kept hearing tonight, I don't know who should have been in, but I know that both of these teams would get beat by 21 by Alabama. How?
The SEC is undefeated in hypothetical games, Kenton.
But that's my point.
Hypothetical games.
But that's my point. And that is why for fan bases like Notre Dame and for the Big Ten as well, which I warned about months ago, hey, I don't know if y'all know this. Y'all hold alliance with the SEC. It's on very thin ice. It is on very thin ice, because as time goes along, the SEC will start to realize, wait a minute now, we're ESPN's golden child, and ESPN is the leader in sports. We've got Disney money backing us. Why under God's green earth would we want to say, they're a good conference too, they should get equal footing? No, we want all the footing. We want all the teams. Again, we're not discussing a team out of the Mountain West. We're not discussing a team out of the Sun Belt. We're discussing a Big Ten team that had one loss and saying, their strength of schedule should have been considered here. Don't get me wrong. I understand the idea that, hey, you have to play good teams and all that good stuff. But we're talking about a team that played the national champion, national runner-up from last year. So when we get into that argument of, hey, strength of schedule has to matter, strength of schedule has to do it. Okay, but then how far are we willing to go to say a good win absolves you of how much? Because at that point in time, how far do we go before we stop it? Because if that's the case, USC was a damn good team this year because of that win over LSU, wasn't it? Oh, no, Georgia State, they beat Vandy. Vandy looked like a really good SEC team at times this year. So Georgia State's got to be good. It's a very dicey game with the strength of schedule matters over, hey, this is still a Power 4 team that has shown up and shown out against, again, teams that on paper were supposed to be good. Who could have predicted Michigan couldn't complete a pass beyond 5 yards for half of the season? Who could have predicted that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna say here, I'm gonna stand up for Notre Dame a little bit with this one, kind of in 2 parts of this, because I think what you said there is it's a really valid point of just kind of the slippery slope that they could go on, because I think a lot of people who, if this was flipped tonight, if this score was exactly flipped, people would be saying the same thing about Notre Dame as they did Indiana's schedule, because it's not great. They didn't play a lot of great teams. They beat Texas A&M. I was there. It was incredible. But they hadn't, Florida State was awful this year. The teams they were supposed to beat weren't good, and they just ran through their schedule. So that's why I think it is a slippery slope, because it's everything you can say bad about Indiana, you kind of can say about Notre Dame and Texas with the schedules that they played. So I think that's why, this game for me, watching it, I'm with you that Indiana, I think, is a good football team. I don't think they're obviously a great football team, but I think this game just shows you how dominant Notre Dame has been this season. That all the scheduling and everything aside, every single week they've gone out there and they have run the ball at will. They have thrown the ball well. They've dealt with big-time injuries on defense throughout the season, and it hasn't really affected them. And really, like even when they got tested by USC, like that game, the defense came through in the clutch with a couple pick sixes. So I think to me, this game still says more big picture about the college football playoff itself and Notre Dame. Because honestly, my biggest beef with the college football playoff is the seeding. I hate that Clemson beat SMU and is not ranked ahead of them. I don't like the way that they really were just looking at like standings. But I think Notre Dame, just the dominant performance they had in this one, it says a lot about them still. And look, we'll learn more next week when they play Georgia. Like that's where really all of this will kind of come to a head for sure.
Well, and something like there's so many just thoughts that go through my mind when I hear all these debates about how, so many more SEC teams deserve to be in. You've got to elevate this 3-loss team over this 1-loss team. And it's like, I know I'm going off the rails a little bit with this because this is slightly off the beaten path, but it's like, let's not pretend that there aren't other advantages of being in the SEC when it comes to the TV revenue, when it comes to the prestige, the exposure you get, because for some of these SEC programs that are complaining about being held out of the playoff because of their 3 losses, well, I'm sure the Big 12 or the ACC would be more than happy to have you. Like if Ole Miss, if you want to give up that extra revenue, that extra prestige you get, come on down to the ACC. So
we got room.
You got room. So it's a trade-off. Yeah, you're going to have a more difficult path into the college football playoff, but there are so many other advantages that come into being in that conference. Unfortunately, that's the reality. Everyone seems to be fully willing to be in that super conference and have all the extra attention that comes with it, but it does come at a price because, you're going to have a tougher road into the CFP because of it.
But what's so tough about the road of beating Kentucky? I love Deion Walker. That's a Cass Tech graduate. Anybody who know me know I'm hard-pressed to say something bad about a team with one of the green guys on it. That team stunk. What's so tough about asking you to score more than 3 points against Oklahoma? I love Brent Venables. I think he should have been the Bud Foster of the 2010s and 2020s as the greatest defensive coordinator ever lived. He's not a great head coach. He held y'all to one of the lowest scores all season. Maine scored more against them boys than y'all did. So what? Oh, I'm sorry. Diego Pavia. He's the guy. He's the one that's the great divider of this thing. Now, mind you, I just named 3 teams that are keeping these guys out, that are keeping these world beaters out. I don't give a damn who you are hypothetically. I don't give a damn if you would beat. Hey, I'm sure all of these teams would beat the Detroit Lions fully healthy. By the way, my line's great for the first time in a while. It feels amazing. But anyway, I'm sure all of them would be amazing in the NFL hypothetically. But the reality is when you put that ball down and you blow that whistle and guys got to move guys got to get in the end zone, guys got to play as a team, it seems to me that there is something lacking in those teams that they get credit for just being in a tough conference when, again, at some point in time, what you do on the field has to matter. How do you lose 25% of your games and we're calling you one of the best teams in the nation? You're losing the two teams that wouldn't have made bowl games without beating you. And we're saying you belong in the playoff. Stop it. Get some help. Lay off the drugs. It's not good for you.
Well, I tell you what, maybe we could have stayed at 4, gone back to the BCS. It would have made things a lot easier because what we're talking about is granting access and not rewarding excellence. Because, look, Indiana, did they deserve to win a national championship? No. Does Alabama deserve a chance to win a national championship? No. Ole Miss, South Carolina? No. SMU? Probably not. It's almost like, guys, they expanded for this thing called, money and not the true nature of a playoff, which is which team is the best in the country.
Yeah, well, thankfully, as a Notre Dame fan, I'm glad they expanded it this year. So, maybe, it would feel the committee would have probably done things differently with the conference championship games. Notre Dame probably would have been in the Final Four, but it's at this point, like, it feels good that they expand. I wish they would have gone to 8 first. Just like give it a shot, guys. Like, let's just see what 8 teams, 6 teams looks like.
And they've already got 14 next year. Yeah,
14 next year.
Well,
or
also, I
2026.
love how people always pretend that if you expand it, we can all stop arguing about who gets in, as if we're not going to be arguing about number 15 and number 16 in a few years. It's like, and I remember when people said, hey, only 2 teams get to play for championship. If we expand it to 4, no one's going to ever complain again. Oh, what's that? We all complain. Let's expand it to 12. Several programs complain about it. Even, I cover Miami. There was some complaints on Miami's side as well. Hadn't really mentioned them. So a lot of teams get into the whole complaining factor. It's going to happen when they go to 14, 16, whatever. There's always going to be someone who feels like they were hard done by this committee.
I think the people who feel like they're most hard done by this committee are the NFL, the draft scouts and whatnot, who said there are so many guys who will be drafted in the first and second round for Alabama and Ole Miss and South Carolina who aren't going to get to play, Dono. Did we think about the scouts? Brett, Barrett, are we thinking about the scouts? Why are we not considering them when we're talking about the best college football teams in the nation? Because, again, apparently the best teams are no longer decided by who wins their games. It's now decided by, well, who has the most All-American? Well, who has the most 4 and 5 stars out of high school? Well,
who
has
looks
the
best getting off the bus?
Hey now, who has the most national championships in the past 10 years? Because apparently Joe Burrow's still in college. Derrick Henry's coming back. Somehow with this JUCO thing, Alvin Kamara's got some renewed eligibility, because that's just what we're looking at in terms of all the things that are being mentioned as what matters when they don't.
All right, we're going to take one more time out here before we get. We'll start talking about next week already, because look, Notre Dame, they dominated this game. It's so funny doing these Notre Dame shows because it just feels like they leave so little to say because of just how well they perform. So we'll talk a little bit about what it's going to look like versus Georgia, because I'm with a lot of people in the comments here. I think Notre Dame's got a strong shot. They're currently 1.5-point favorites at the Sugar Bowl next week, so they are favored, which honestly surprised me, even with the quarterback injuries. We'll get into that next year on the Locked On Irish Squad show. Tonight's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better. I'm already using the Game Time app for the holidays. We're going to take my 3-year-old son to his first basketball game, and we use Game Time to get those tickets. I love the all-in pricings. You can see the toggling feature. You toggle that feature and you can see your total upfront cost, not having to worry about all the surprise fees at checkout. And I love the panoramic view. If you listen to Locked On Sports Chicago, I always tell people when we're talking about Game Time, if you're going to Wrigley Field for the first time, you want to use that view because, well, you might be behind a giant steel pole if you don't use it. It's a huge advantage with Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It's game time. Joe George, Alex Dono, Kenton Gibbs, and Barrett Silly here on the Locked On Irish Squad show, all across the Locked On Sports Network, on the Locked On Sports Chicago YouTube channel, Locked On Irish, and Smothered and Covered as well, which Barrett Silly hosts, and Alex and Kenton are the hosts of the Locked On ACC podcast. So next week, Notre Dame, Georgia, I believe it's the 7:45 Central Time kickoff at the Sugar Bowl. This game, Notre Dame opens up as a 1.5-point favorite. It was 2.5 when it first opened. It's moved just a little bit here. I'm curious what it will be when we actually get to kickoff a week and a half from today, whatever it is. But early thoughts right now, Barrett, on what Georgia's going to look like. You mentioned earlier you think they're maybe in a better position now with a quarterback change being forced upon them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because last time out, I think in the second half, I think it was pretty clear that Mike Bobo was being very quarterback friendly with, or Gunnar Stockton friendly, I should say. They understood, hey, he's got his limitations. This is not the place you want to put him in. And he did make a terrible throw at the end of regulation, which could have cost them. And, so they've had a lot of time to work that out. The thing about it, though, is that they've never really been able to run the football effectively all year. Travis Etienne's had his moments and Nate Frazier's had his moments, but consistently it's been average at best. With Gunner back there as a mobile quarterback, maybe that changes a little bit. But to me, I'm not surprised Notre Dame's a favorite. I think that there's so much uncertainty with Georgia and so much certainty with Notre Dame because, like I said, they're the best boring team in college football. You know what you're going to get. The ceiling might not be super high, but the floor is super high as well. Whereas Georgia, I mean, it's I live in the state. I've gotten know that program very, very well. The amount of angst, animosity, and anger about this team is close to Ohio State levels at this point. And I'm not even joking. So I think it's going to be on that Notre Dame defense to slow down that rushing attack and make Gunnar Stockton win with his arm. And if he does, you shake his hand, you go home, and you watch the rest of the tournament because I mean you can't just assume that suddenly he's going to turn into Johnny Unitas back there.
Kent, what are your thoughts for that game coming up?
Oh, I think you're muted.
See, the big SEC lobby is trying to silence me, assuming that he won't turn into Johnny Unitas or Cam Newton or Joe Burrow. That's just a bad bet because, again, it just means more to those guys. But in all seriousness, I'm going to tell you something. I think that Notre Dame is going to come out there and shock the world. And they're favored, so I don't think it's that much of a shocking of the world. But for the casual fans who have not been paying attention and who are still holding on, just squeezing every drop out of they lost to NIU, well, you're going to have a little bit of a requiem in terms of what you are looking at and what you are actually discussing by what you have seen. I believe that Notre Dame wins a rock fight. I don't think they dominate. I think they win a rock fight. I think they win a very, very ugly game, 17-10. I really have a strong feeling that Notre Dame gets it done up front and that Jeremiyah Love, he's a guy that all year. The more tape I watch on him, the harder it looks to tackle him. And even today, despite not having that many yards per touch outside of 98-yard, he looked hard to bring down. It didn't look like he had much open space, but every time first contact was just sliding off him. He's like a boss man D-Lo. He's Mr. Too Slippery. So it's hard to get him down. With that in mind, I think that they win a close one. I really do have respect for Georgia. I have respect for what Kirby Smart has built. I have respect for ETN and company. I just think you're going to have a really, really hard time with Stockton at quarterback winning this football game. And again, I think all things even and with their starting quarterback, if he's playing at his highest clip, I think that Georgia will win this game. But without him, I think that there's just something that they're missing. And I'm a believer in Notre Dame pulling this one off.
And I think they've been missing it all year. That's why there's such a lack of confidence in Georgia. It's just It's not the same Georgia team of the last 3 years.
Yeah. As Bain would say, their chin has been softened by victory.
Yeah.
Alex, what do you think about that game? Georgia, Notre Dame coming up.
I lean ever so slightly to Notre Dame. Neither outcome would surprise me. I think the only thing that would surprise me would be a blowout in either direction. I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a game where the clock moves pretty quickly, especially if Notre Dame is able to play the style that they want to play. And I know, Joe, I was surprised when you mentioned that the Irish are 1.5 favorites, just because, the whole SEC bias thing, I guess, doesn't come into play this time around. But I'll tell you what doesn't surprise me is I'm looking on FanDuel, and the over-under for this game, a measly 44.5 points, which
I thought it might have started with a 3, to be honest with you.
I mean, a college football game in this era, usually you're seeing
that's Iowa style.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you usually when you've got an over-under that's in the 50s, you say, oh, they're expecting a low-scoring game. Like in the 40s, it's like something you haven't seen over the last couple of decades in college football. So it tells you a lot about what sort of a game the bettors and the odds makers are expecting a low-scoring, probably a close game. Styles make fights, and I think that this is a good matchup for Notre Dame and a winnable game for them. And I was looking at some of the live comments that came in earlier from Notre Dame fans, and I can agree with this point that from a Notre Dame point of view, you're disappointed that Carson Beck is not going to start in this game because I don't necessarily think that would make that much of a difference when it came to the stylistic matchup, because if Notre Dame beats a Gunnar Stockton-led Georgia, people will be trying to discount that win. And not that matters, because at the end of the
day,
it's like when
Alabama, it's like the Colt McCoy Alabama thing in 2009.
Yeah, right.
But let me tell you, I'm not buying the no true Scotsman fallacy. I'm not doing it. I don't give a damn how you cut it, how you slice it. You can't tell me that's your conference's champion, and your conference means more, and your conference is better than everybody else, but without your starting quarterback, all of a sudden, you're an entirely different team, but you still belong in the playoffs. Nah, you can't have it every way. Is it Uchiwali or is it one Mike? You can't have both.
Yeah, I don't care. As a Notre Dame fan, like I'm good. Like it doesn't matter who's at quarterback. You get to the Final Four, like that's all that matters to me. Frankly, like you get past Georgia, I think Notre Dame's got a great path to the national championship game. Honestly, there was a lot of ways the bracket could have shaken out for them, and I don't think a quarterback injury was one we kind of factored in. At least I wasn't. I was always kind of viewing it as getting that 5 versus 12 matchup originally would have been a great one, or getting Boise State or Arizona State in the next round. But I think this next week or this next game here, I think Notre Dame definitely, like the number makes sense to me because of the quarterback change. Also just what they can do running the ball. Like now this is obviously their biggest test, but they did have success against Texas A&M. That was a long time ago, but Mike Elko had that team prepared right away in week 1. So I'm curious to see how well they run the ball. And honestly, I think the most important thing for me is seeing how quickly I can get on Jeremiyah Love 2025 Heisman odds, because after this touchdown run tonight, and if he's good next week, like they're going to shrink a little bit. Barrett, how do you think this coaching matchup plays out? Because like, how far apart is Marcus Freeman from Kirby Smart?
Well, we haven't seen Marcus Freeman in this setting, right? I think Kirby early on in his career, like in the 2018 SEC championship game when he called for a fake punt tied at midfield with Justin Fields as the up back, he panicked a little bit. You don't really see that from him anymore. You see him tone it down, crank it down when he needs to, and play smart. I don't think that Marcus Freeman really, he hadn't been there, so you don't really know, hey, when's he going to push that button? When's he going to push that surprise onside kick button or anything like that? So Kirby has the edge. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but it's really only because Marcus Freeman hasn't proved it, and because Kirby learned from his mistakes early on when he hadn't proved it yet. So Kirby's got the edge. But don't get me wrong. I think Marcus Freeman's fully capable of coaching and winning a national championship. He's that good. He's just got to learn on the fly and make sure he, when he does make mistakes, to learn lessons from them, even if they pay off. Recognize, hey, you got to do this at the right time. Otherwise, you can dig yourself in a hole that maybe you can't dig yourself out of.
Yeah, I think tonight's a great example. He got the timeout from Cignetti on that fake field goal, but please don't do that again. That was a disaster of a play call decision. Like, honestly, even the reverse, I liked it to start the second half, but my immediate reaction was, why didn't they save that for Georgia? Like, why are you wasting that fake play on against Indiana? But yeah, please don't run that fake field goal ever again, because that was a disaster of a play.
I want to address something you said there, Joe, in terms of getting in on those Heisman odds for Jeremiyah Love early. Those things are already shrinking as we speak, okay? During that 98-yarder, I heard the Sharps saying, they were down on Wall Street. Give me love right now. They were screaming, give me love, like it was Valentine's Day or something. But I'll tell you this much. I look at Jeremiyah Love, and I absolutely say he can be a difference maker in this game. But I truly think that the X factor for this game, as obvious as it is, I think people are greatly underestimating which quarterback is going to make the play. Because in 2024, you have to have a quarterback that's going to make just 1 or 2 plays a game. Just 1 or 2 plays, that pivotal moment where you say everything swung in our favor at this play. A quarterback's going to throw one in a tight window and it works, or a quarterback's going to throw one in a tight window and there's going to be Katie Diggs at the doorstep for the other team. I'm not sure which quarterback is going to do that, and that is my only concern for Notre Dame, because I have nothing on Stockton. I should feel very comfortable saying Riley Leonard's going to be the guy to make the positive play, but there's still something in me that's a little hesitant there. With that in mind, though, I do believe that defensively, I have not seen a defense as good as Notre Dame's in quite some time. A complete unit, top to bottom, all 3 levels, depth as well. I have not seen a defense that good in quite some time. And so, again, if if Riley Leonard can be the guy to make those couple of right plays, Notre Dame will be just fine.
Alex, any thoughts on that?
About what yeah, sure. I mean, it's like this might end up, like you said, Kenton, coming down to which quarterback either makes the one extra big play or the one extra brutal mistake. At the same time, if you think about some of the other teams that are in the CFP and some of the other matchups, like this game specifically seems to be a lot less about the quarterbacks than it is about everything else. Yeah. Coaches included, lines of scrimmages, defenses, because, neither of these quarterbacks, or especially, with Gunnar Stockton being a guy we've barely seen, neither of these guys were knocking on the door to win a Heisman Trophy or anything like that. But this is just going to be it. And I'm so looking forward to this matchup because, Notre Dame was completely dominant tonight at the lines of scrimmage. And I already picked Notre Dame to probably edge out this game coming up. So don't call me a hater or anything, but I just want to point out one extra thing. You're talking about a neutral site game coming up. Notre Dame had the crowd. They had the home playoff. They had, I know Indiana also plays in Indiana, but I think the weather was something that worked into the Irish's favor a little bit. So, it is something else to think about. But at the same time, whether you're playing indoors or outdoors, things that travel very well are great defenses and great play at the line of scrimmage. And Notre Dame has both of those things. So I think that those things are going to travel pretty well to the Sugar Bowl next week.
Notre Dame also travels very well. Their fan base does. And so convincing a bunch of Irish folks to go to Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve should not be that difficult.
No, it should not.
Yeah, I don't have a dog in the fight, but I might show up.
I'm going back to game time as soon as the show ends to see if I can make the drive from Houston to New Orleans and see if I can be going to that one. All right, we're going to take one more break and then get our final thoughts on tonight's win over Indiana for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish here on the Locked On Irish Squad Show on the Locked On Sports Podcast Network. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then, the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, guys, final thoughts here on the game tonight. Anything we didn't hit on that you want to mention from tonight's game? Kenton, we'll start with you there.
The only thing that I feel like we've said already, but I need to reiterate this one more time. I don't give a damn if your quarterback is hurt. If Notre Dame dominates this game, we need to go back and reevaluate how we looked at multiple teams that they beat this year. Multiple teams that we said, oh, you're fraudulent because Notre Dame dominated you. We may need to go back and say, you know what? Maybe Indiana was a good team. Maybe they were a good team. Maybe they just ran into a buzzsaw and a future national champion. I really and truly believe that because, again, I think that Notre Dame right now, it's crazy to say this. It really is, especially because I know the Golden Domer boost. I've seen it snatch away a trophy from my beloved Peyton Wilson and take it to Xavier Watts, which the Nagurski was his. It was his. He was the best defender in America. But with that being said, there is definitely a moment where I'm looking at Notre Dame feeling like they got to feel like the Rodney Dangerfield of college football right now because they get no respect at all. They're trying their best, but nobody is giving them their love, no matter who they beat, no matter how much they beat them by.
Alex?
Yeah, a couple of players I hadn't given enough love to. Jordan Faison had a big grab and a big game for the Irish, 7 receptions for 89 yards. And I know that the passing game on either side weren't really the headline makers. It was more of the defense, and it was more of Jeremiyah Love for Notre Dame. But there were some clutch catches and some big-time throws that Riley Leonard made. And also, if I can give Jeremiyah a little more love for something else, because we talked about see what I did there. We talked about the 98-yard run, but he also had a highlight reel stiff arm on a separate run in that game where he sent an Indiana defender into next week.
He also had a hurdle for no reason, but just because it looked good.
He's done like 4 of those this year,
right?
And they're sick, all of them.
Yeah, a hurdle for like maybe he picked up an extra half yard on the hurdle, but it looked unbelievable. Like that's going to be on a poster.
Not on the highlight reel.
And pretty soon. Yeah. So no, that's about it. I think we hit on the big points. It was a really dominant defensive performance, but there were a few other standout players I wanted to mention.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say is, for people down south, which is where I'm from, can we stop it with the Notre Dame is overrated thing? Notre Dame, generally speaking, is properly rated every single preseason. And right now they're properly rated in the college football playoff. They're going into a season, leaving a season. They're pretty darn good, and they're pretty darn good. Again, it goes back to what I've been saying. Is the ceiling as high as Georgia's or Oregon's? No, of course not. But in a season like this, having your floor as high as Notre Dame's means you're a pretty darn good team. And in this particular season, it means you can win a national championship.
Somebody cut Barrett's mic up. Somebody cut Barrett's mic up.
Last thing for me, this is a funny one, it feels like, but it was a talking point for me throughout the season. My gosh, was it good to see that 49-yard field goal go through for Mitch Jeter, because he has been brutal this year. As it deserves to be said, because it was one of my biggest questions for Notre Dame going to the playoff was if you have a kicker who's hitting 50% of his field goals, you're not winning college football playoff games. So that was very just refreshing to see that happen in this game. I got a final question here actually for you guys. I'll throw one more at you. Georgia Tech. Notre Dame handled them. Georgia did not. Does that matter to you in your mind when you think of this game coming up?
Not really. Not really to me. I love Georgia Tech. I love Brent Key, but they're to me, it's you can't do the thing where a rivalry matters all that. I was at that Georgia Tech game. Those Yellow Jackets were it was a different level. And Haynes King at the end of the season, he put that team on his back. It's just to me, different times, different parts of the season. I don't think you can take much from that.
You can't.
I'm going to agree with that, especially because Georgia Tech was a really up and down team. They almost got shut out by Virginia Tech. If you were to judge them by their best performance of the season, which was that rivalry game against Georgia, you also have to look at the full body of work. The whole thing with the common opponent math, there's some value to it. In this case, I don't think there's a whole lot.
You can't do transitive property with 18 to 22-year-olds. Most of them don't even know what transitive property is. You cannot go from week to week saying I expect these groups of 18 to 22-year-olds to play the exact same way the next week. Think about who we all were as 18 to 22-year-olds. Some of us may have played a little bit of college football. Some of us may have not. But think about who you were.
I was an idiot back then.
Exactly. So I don't really believe in using too much of this is who you were against this team and this is who you were against this team, especially when it's at such different parts of the season as well. I kind of look at that and I'm this ain't Georgia plays Georgia Tech, Notre Dame plays Georgia Tech, and then they play each other a week later. I think there's too much space between those games.
Yeah.
All right, so that will wrap it up for us here on the first Locked On Irish Squad show here all across the Locked On Sports Podcast Network. Joe George, Alex Dono, Barrett Slee, Kenton Gibbs. Thank you all for hanging out with us in the chat, watching us on YouTube. Just a reminder, if you missed any of the show and you want to catch it, you can catch it right away on YouTube. But also, the audio will be available all across audio platforms. Just look for Locked On Irish, and it'll be there on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be back, some combination of us. And for the Locked On Irish people, Tyler Wojak will not be at that game, I'm guessing, and will be here as well. So thanks for watching. Appreciate you, everyone. Let's go Irish. We'll talk to you soon.